Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Bava Basra Daf Samach Tes. We're just starting at the Mishnah at the bottom of Samach Tes Amud Beis. This whole parak so far has been discussing when we make a sale, what is by default included or what is by default excluded. If we add more specificity in our language, does that change things? Yes or no? Let's start with this next Mishnah. This Mishnah has a lot of small details in it, and we're going to just pick them apart. The whole first Amud is relatively clean and simple. Let's get started. What if I'm selling a field? Then the stones that are in that field, which are part and parcel, they're not just part and parcel in that they live there, but they're needed. Not stop, and we'll have to define this in the Gemara. So then they're included. The reeds that are in the vineyards, we don't know why there would be reeds in vineyards as of right now, which have a purpose. If there's grain that's attached to the ground, then that too will be included in the sale. This is a section in the ground of reeds where they're basically growing, but it's a small area. It's less than a base rova. That is included in the sale. V'es hashomira, this is some type of guard hut of some kind, she'ena asuya bitit, which is not solidified with mortar of some kind or cement. V'es hacharuv she'ena morkav, this is a carob tree that is not strong enough to have morkav. Morkav is when there's grafting. So if a tree is very thin, the branches are very thin, they can't handle harkava, they can't handle the grafting. Typically, the way grafting is done is they cut the existing branch on an angle, they cut the new branch at an angle, and they tape it together till they start growing together. So if that initial branch is not strong enough, that's what we're talking about here. If it's a carob tree that isn't strong enough for harkava, that's included. The sycamore tree was used for its wood. The basulas hashikma is a tree that has yet to ever been cut for its wood. That's why it's a psula, never used in that way. Aval, all of that's included in the sale. Aval, lo machar, what is not included in the sale when you sell a field? Lo asa avanim she'enim l'tzorka, rocks that don't really play a role. Let's call them pebbles, rocks, stones, whatever, useless ones. If there are reeds in the vineyard that really don't have a purpose, those are not included. And grain that is not attached to the ground is not included. All of that is what is by default excluded from the sale of a sadeh. And 3 lines from the bottom, the Mishnah continues. What if we got more specific? If we were to add in the sale of the sadeh, the field and all of its inhabitants, everything that's in it, then Hare Kula and Mechur, and everything that we just learned that was in the excluded list is now included. Seemingly simple. However, ben kach uben kach, there are some things that no matter what, even if you are overly specific, there still is lo machar lo eschitzas hakanim shi beis rova. If you have a reed field that's larger than a base, I should say it's a base rova or larger, so then that is going to be excluded. If there is going to be a guard house of some kind that is solidified in the ground, not a carob tree that is strong enough to handle harkava, below es sidan hashikma, and not with a shikma tree that has been used already. That brings us to the Gemara at the top of Samach Tes Amud Aleph, starting to analyze the Mishnah. Let's jump in and move quickly. My avanim shein letzorka. What is included when we say avanim shein letzorka? How do we define that? So says the Gemara Machlokas. Hacha targimu avne de'achba. These are stones that were put on top of the piles. Namely, if you have stones that are weighing down, when you drive through Southern Illinois, you see the big bales of hay, but you don't want them to roll in the wind. So you take a rock, a heavy rock, 200 pounds, and you just sit it down on top of the bale of hay so it doesn't go anywhere. That's this. It's a stone that's being used for a specific purpose. However, Ula Amar, avanim hasiduros legeder. No, we're talking about stones that are being used to build a wall. Top of Samach Tes Amud Aleph, 3 lines down. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Not that they're siduros, not that they're already built and organized, right? If you build them like bricks, right? You have the bottom row of bricks and then slightly offset in the next. So then the Gemara says that that's not what we're talking about. Maybe we should say we're talking about avanim sivuros together. They're just made in a pile, but they're not actually organized. Says the Gemara, you're absolutely right. Tani siduros. You're right. That Bryce says incorrect. It shouldn't say avanim sivuros. It should say siduros. So basically, we have a machlokes. Avanim shein letzorcha are one of 2 things. It is either the stones that are being used as a weight to make sure that the grain doesn't fly away, or it is rocks that are used in an organized way to build a wall. That's what the Gemara says.
These are not rocks that are in the ground.
You'll see that not only is that true, but it may even be more lenient than that. The wall may not even be built yet. but they're just ready to be built. That's machlokas we're going to see right now. Says the Gemara, Hacha Targimu, answer number one that we just saw is Abnei de Achpa, the stones that are holding down the grain so it doesn't fly anywhere. The Rav Meir de Metaknan Afal Gav de Lamachta. Rav Meir holds, even if you have set them aside, but they're not actively weighing down the grain, they're still part of the sale. That's considered Litzarcha, no problem at all. However, the Rabbanan, according to the rabbis, they disagree with Rav Meir. Hu demachta. No, just having the rock sitting next to the bale of hay to hold the grain down is not enough. It has to actually be weighing down the grain for it to count. So machlokes, Rav Meir and the Rabbanan as to whether or not the rocks in this case would be included or excluded in the sale of the sadeh. The Rav Meir throughout this Gemara will be much more lenient, meaning even if the rock is present, its goal is to weigh down grain, but doesn't matter. He's more lenient. The Rabbanan are always going to be more strict. All of that was within the answer that Avanim Shem Letzarcha is Avnei Da'achba, the ones that are weighing down the grain. 6 lines down. Ula Damar Avanim Hasiduras Legeder, according to Ula, who said that when our Mishnah said Avanim Shem Letzarcha was talking about stones that are organized into a wall, the Rav Meir, that's true even if they are Dimitaknan Afal Gav Sidran. They drop off a pallet of 500 rocks that are made for your wall, but the wall is not built yet. Rav Meir says no problem. When you sell the field and they're still in the crate, that's still part of the wall, still part of the sale. Why? They're not being used right now. Now you're saying like Rav Meir. What?
They're not attached to the wall.
I'm torn between.
Like the paper is still a paperweight that has a purpose. It might not be on paper currently, but it has.
No, it's more like your like a dishwasher in your house attached to the wall. But if the paperweight's not attached,
The dishwasher is not being used currently, but it's there to wash dishes. Like it feels
Right.
like it's a purpose.
I hear you. I hear. It's just difficult to define rocks that are necessary. Like, I think what's happening here is that we're all agreeing that the rocks can't just be stopped. They have to, at a minimum, be set aside for that purpose. Random rocks in the field, not included in the sale. That's for sure what's happening. And what's our threshold of included in the sale or not? Their machlokas is drawing the line between set aside versus already in use. Yesh ladun. I hear both sides. So according to Ula's answer, what about Avanim Seduros? Rav Meir said, as long as they're next to the wall, but they have not yet been organized, still part of the sale. The Rabbanan and I disagree. No, just setting aside the rocks are insufficient for them to be included in the sale. Hu desidran. They have to actually be laid out in that whatever pattern you're using. Let's call it the brick pattern, right? The brick overlaying one half of each on each half in the row below. Okay, that brings us to the 2 dots we had said. Why are reeds in the karam in the first place? We're growing grapes. What's with the reeds? Says the Gemara, Kanim, why did you even bring the reeds into this place in the first place? Doesn't make any sense. Amir debei Reb Yanai, Kanim hamechulakin. They're very smooth reeds. They're put under the grape clusters so that they don't touch the ground and get dirty. Nowadays in Eretz Yisrael, you see like those nettings around the dates in the trees. Kilu, that's the same thing by the grapes, but not with dates. By grapes, this was their system. They take a wide reed, they kind of hang it in a way where the grapes could grow without falling too low to touch the ground. And here too, same machlokas between Rav Meir and the Rabbanan. Le Rav Meir, in regards to these reeds, the Mishafian, once they're smoothed out, Afal Gav de Lo Mukman, even though they're not put in place yet to do their job of protecting the grapes, they're still part of the Sadeh. However, the Rabbanan, Hu de Mukman, it's only true, not if you just smooth them out. They have to actually be in use. So we're seeing each of them are Lashitasim. It's party lines through and through throughout our Gemara. We had said in our Mishnah, what about the grain that is attached to the ground? Says the Gemara, even though we're up to the point where we're ready to harvest them, namely, the grain doesn't need the ground anymore. If they were cut today, no problem. They're fresh. They're ready to go. They're past the point of ripe. So therefore, the Gemara said, that's why we had to teach this din, because I might have thought that once it's ready to be harvested, since we no longer need the ground, we're good to go. Next, this field of reeds that's less than a beis rova. Even if these are very, very strong reeds and they have a certain chashivus to them, afal pikein, they're still not included in the sale. Oh, the other way, they still are included in the sale. Yeah, they still are included in the sale. What about this hut, this guard hut that is not yet solidified with cement? It's excluded. It's included in the sale, even though it's not kavia and it's not in the ground. So it's not really mechuber lakarka, but it has its own kind of standing chashivas. It's keilu like a mobile home. They're not connected to the ground, but that's people live there. That's a chashivas. So this shomira is the same exact thing. First of the long lines, what's going on with these trees that they're included? The charav, the carob tree that's not yet strong enough for harkava, for grafting, and the shikma, the wood tree that they would typically use for wood purposes for beams, but they have yet to ever cut it. Afalgav de alimi, they're included, even though they could have really been very strong. They could have had their own chashivus. That is not going to be included over here. That is going to be included over here. At the two dots in the middle of the page, 2 lines down. Aval lo but rocks that are not being used, so then those are not going to be sold. You're welcome to join if you'd like. Feel free, but don't feel obligated. There's one right there. Over there. Yeah. Mazel tov, by the way. It's Daf Yomi. It's a Bava Basra Samach test. So we had said 2 lines into the wide lines of Allah machar sa'avanim she'enon letzorcha. We have to exclude from the sale of the sadeh rocks that are not being used. L'Rav Meir to lo metaknon, l'Rabbanan to lo machtan. Remember, each again party line. Rav Meir says the only time they're excluded is when they're not even prepared for their purpose. That's below the threshold of tzorach. And according to the Rabbanan, even if they are prepared for their purpose, but they're lo machtan, they're not placed where they should be placed, whatever the application is, that is excluded as well. Ula damar avanim asuros together. What about ula? Again, within this frame of lo machar sa'avanim she'enon letzorcha. So it says the Gemara halfway down on Samach Testament Aleph, he holds that we're talking about rocks for a wall. The Rav Meir de lo metaknon, same application. Rav Meir says the walls that are being used for a rock, but they haven't been brought to their location, they haven't been prepared yet. That's going to be excluded. And the Rabbanan de lo sidra, and the Rabbanan say even if you did bring them, but if they're not masudar yet, you didn't lay out the bricks properly, then they will be excluded as well. 4 lines into the wide lines. We know that the reeds had a purpose. Their purpose was to protect the grapes from getting dirty. What were the reeds that had no purpose? The Rav Meir de lo meshafyan. Rav Meir says that a reed that has no purpose is one that wasn't yet smoothed out for this purpose. And the Rabbanan, they say that even if it was smoothed out already, but de lo mukman, it wasn't put in place, excluded. Because again, this Gemara is actually very repetitive in a way, because we've already learned the same thing about Rav Meir and the Rabbanan 5 times. We know that Rav Meir is one step further along the process than the Rabbanan. We had said, we said, what about grain that is excluded that's already been cut from the karka? That's not included in the sale. Even though we do want it to lay out in the field, we want it to dry there. We want it to get a little moisture from the ground, whatever they're doing. But there's a reason why agricultural farmers leave things on the ground. We talk about this in Shas all the time. They laid things out on the roof. They laid things out on the ground to dry normal. So because over here it's tzricha la'ara, but it's tlusha. So because of the fact that it's tlusha, that the grains have already been harvested, so therefore they're not included in the sale. We had said below if you have a field of reeds that's greater than a base roba, even though any one particular reed was very thin, we might have thought that wasn't a good harvest, and therefore it should not be considered chashuv. No, the size of the field is a base roba, so it's chashuv. Amar Rav Bar Abba, Amar Rav Yochanan, lo chitzas hakanim bilvad, ela afilu aruga ktana shel besamim v'yesh lashim b'fnei atzma einanim kerasima. It's not just about the chitzas hakanim. Even if I have a small patch of food or spices, and it has a name to it, einanim kerasima. The Gemara is going to give an example. Amar Rav Papa, v'hu dekarula varda de planya, the roses of so and so. So let's say I have my dad often grows tomatoes in the backyard. That's Dr. Karesh's tomato patch. Done. Even if it's less than a base roba, it has chashibus, has a person's name attached to it, so then the halacha changes. We are 10 lines from the bottom of the 2 dots. So that not included in the sale of the field is this hut that is cemented into the ground. I should say not that it's cemented into the ground, but it's sealed with cement. Even if it is attached to the ground, it's still excluded. It's still excluded. But it's chashiv. Has a chashivus to it. Yeah, exactly right. And therefore it's excluded. And I might have thought that if it's connected to the ground, it's part of the sadeh. Should be part of the sadeh. So that's the chiddush. Is that because it's a suyulatit, it's kind of made in a chashuv way. It's built well.
Seasonal.
Why?
The other ones is not. The other ones.
What other ones?
The one that isn't.
Oh yeah.
It's almost logical to say if it's not permanent, then it's there just to be a washer, temporary, whatever.
Therefore,
it's built with cement, like somebody might live there, spend time.
But what we're vacillating between is it's mechuber lakarka, but at the same time it has chashivus. So when you have that tension, who wins? So the Gemara is now answering that question to say that even though afalpi it's mechuber ba'ara, but the fact is that because it's suya batita, it was made in a chashuv way, so therefore it's not included in the sale. It has its own identity. Skip the parentheses, 7 lines from the bottom. Boy, Rebbe Lazar, we're going to go through three quick questions, and we'll have a teku for each of them. Melabnos shel psachim mahu. The bricks that surround a door, what is their status? Do we say hechad mechaber betina lo tibaylach mechubar? Do we say that if they're actually cemented in with mortar, that that's not a shayla at all, mechubar, that's attached to the wall, pashat, that's part of the sale, or kitibaylach dinakiti besichi, or maybe we're talking about where it's only held in with pins. It's not cemented in. I could remove it if I wanted to, but there's a pin in there. Oh, so that the Gemara says, my halacha is teku. I should say the halacha. The non-answer is teku. The Gemara says, as another shayla, melabnos shel chalonos. What about the bricks around windows? Do we say they're meant to be attractive? They're just meant to be there for decoration. Or they're attached to the ground, and therefore they're attached to the ground. They should be part of the sale. Here too, the Gemara says, teku. It's amazing. You sell a house. There's so much that we sell that in halacha would not be sold. Again, we add in we're more, our contracts are way more articulate than what's happening over here. But without, again, stam, there's a lot of things that would not be for sale. So let's say the window treatments on our house, the external ones, they're in our house, but the ones that we see, those are purely for design. Pashut that they're not included in the sale of the house. Oh, or is it mechuber to the bias? So we don't know. But if I were to sell my house, it could be that my window treatments are not included. Unbelievable. Even my blinds, the chora, are not included. Right? So again, we're selling things according to American statutes. But halacha l'maisa, if we lived in a pure halachic society, it would be a very difficult question to answer because the Gemara left this in a take. That's what the Gemara has done. Legal. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. In American law, we know what happens, basically. I mean, there are some things that come up, but we know what basically happens. But when you have a pure halachic society, which please God soon, we don't have one of those. But if we did, then and we only did our contracts al pi halacha, we'd have a very hard time selling our houses because you have to go through everything. The window treatments, the fan, the blades of the fan, are they different than the light of the fan? There's so many thousands of chakiras.
There is no agreement. You could contractually.
You could add in specificity, but we're saying stam, what happens? Let's say you have a very light, you and I are friends, we say, I'm just going to buy your house. You say, no problem. And here's your money. No problem. In that case, you were selling me the house in the example. You're unbelievable. The copper is, that's a business. It's a business. And the third kasha, what about the support beams of the beds? Because they were really separate from the mattress itself. So it says the Gemara, do we say, perhaps if they're super portable, they're really not connected, then they are not part of the sale. And kiti bailach, maybe the only kasha is if they're really affixed to the bed, they're fused, whatever the case may be. My teku, don't know. These things are never going to be included, even if you specify. Says the Gemara, how do we know this? This is a pasuk. Let's read on the side the whole pasuk if you have it. Asher lifnei mamre asadev hamara asher bo v'chol ha'itz asher basade asher bechol gvulo saviv. Okay, we know what this is talking about the Marsha Machpelah. And the Gemara says as a drasha, mishet tzarach legvul saviv. When we are talking about a tree in Stay Ephron, we're only talking about trees that are defined by their gvul. In other words, there's thousands of maple trees in Chicago. So if you want to say Phil's maple tree, you have to identify it by my property. However, there are other trees that are super identifiable on their own. I remember this when I was a little kid. The ginkgo tree has a funky leaf. Rav Gedai Dov Schwartz, his house has a massive ginkgo tree right in front. In my head, that tree is super identifiable by itself. So there's a difference between trees that are the regular tree, right? And then there are the trees that are miyuchad. So that's what the Gemara is distinguishing. These trees which are identifiable by themselves, that's I don't know if that's not at Phil's house. I would recognize that tree anywhere. Again, we're not adjusted to these things. We're not botanists. We don't know these things. But that's the nafkamina. Trees that are kind of run of the mill, they can only be identified by property markers. But if you have a tree that is unique, it doesn't need identity. It doesn't need that. So that's how the Gemara says, answering the question we started with, how did we know that the charuv tree and the shikma, how do we know that they were different? So that's what the Gemara is saying over here. And Amar of Masharshia, mikan lemitzarim minatorah. Unbelievable. From here we know that boundaries are a dindo raisa. It's not stam. Meaning my property, right? My property at home, 40 by 125. The pin, dindo raisa. My property. It's not a suffix, it's not the Rabbanan, it's mine. That's a din d'oraisa, and we learn it from here because we know that for the trees that taka do need an address to identify the tree. Let's call it the maple tree, the typical classic tree, an oak tree, whatever. So in those cases, we only know those things because of the boundaries. Therefore, we know that Mitzarim are Min HaTorah. When I first read this, I'm like, what does it mean Mitzrayim is Min HaTorah? As I read it the first time, I'm such a shake. I don't even, but by the way, there's a beautiful word by Mitzrayim. Yitzias Mitzrayim is Yitzias Mitzarim. When we left Egypt, it was the breaking of the boundaries of the Yid. We became a people. Beautiful word. Save it for Pesach. It's a good one. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Hayman de Bezavet Ara Lechavre. If I sell land to a friend, Tzarach lemichtav le, Kani lach diklin v'talin v'hutzin v'tzitzim. We need to add in these are different specific types of date trees, of dekel trees. We have to add them in. Now, even if you don't write them, the sale still works, but we like the specificity. It's considered an improvement in the shtar to be more specific. That just prevents machlokes. If I have a property with 10 different kinds of trees, the more specific I am, the less there's going to be machlokes. Halfway down, Omar Le, we're going to have 6 cases in a row that are very similar, and we'll stop right at the bottom of the page. The Gemara says, Omar Le Ara V'dikli, if I'm selling you land and a dekel tree, that seems to imply that the dekel tree is not in the land, right? So it says the Gemara, Chazinan, Isle Dikli, if he has another location where he has a dekel tree, Yoav Le Tre Dikli, then I have to give 2 dekel tree, because dikli is plural, and the land separately. Lesle, and if I don't have separate of the land a dekel tree, Zavin Le Tre Dikli, I have to go sell them to him. If the only ones I have are in shibu to other people for money that I owe them, Harik Le Tre Dikli, you have to redeem them. You can't just talk freely. If you say Arabidikli, the guy has to get land and he has to get a minimum of 2 trees. Right? We're very careful with our language. First of the long lines, 2/3 of the way down. Arabidikli. What about Arabidikli? This sounds like land with a dekel. Chazina. Ba dikli. If in this land there is a dekel, Yoav he gets it. V'ilav. But if the property doesn't have a dekel at all, mekach tosu. You pashut lie. I'm selling you my property that has a dekel tree, and it is flat grass through and through. You're a liar. That's a mekach tos. The whole thing's a 0. Next case. Arabidikli. I'll have to see what this means. Arabe dikli, a land as it relates to a dekel. Let's see what this means. Lesle dikli, if there is no dekel, dechazia dikli kamarle. What it meant is that it's land that's shaykh to grow. It's fertile enough to grow a dekel tree. That's Arabe dikli means it's shaykh enough to grow one, but not that there should be one. Amarle levarmi dikla planya. What if he was trying to exclude a dekel tree? So that we don't know chazina. If what he pointed to was an excellent, high-quality dekel, then shiur shaire. That's what he's leaving out. All the lesser quality trees are going to be kept in place. But idikla bishahu kol shekenanach. If what he's saying is that I'm excluding this bad tree, pashut that if he's saving even that tree, saving all the better ones, and none of those trees would then be part of the sale. Omar le levar mi ilani. What if he says this language of I'm excluding trees? Now, typically in Gemara language, we don't refer to dekel trees as ilane. We refer to them as dikli, as dekel trees. So yes, they're both trees in the kingdoms, phylums, all that kind of stuff. It's true, but our jargon is not that way. Our jargon is that trees refer to most other trees, but not dekel. Okay, now with that in mind, isle ilane. Livarma ilani. What that means, if there are trees, then he's excluding ilani. Isle dikli, then if all he has is a dekel tree, then even though in general we don't assume that ara and dikli are synonymous, but if the only trees that are growing there are dekel, then it must be livarma dikli that he's excluding the dekel tree. Isle gufni, if he has vines and that's all he has, then livarmi gufni, then his ara refers to the gefen. Ilani begufni, what if he has trees in gefen? Then we assume that what he meant was livarmi ilani, but the gufni are part of the sale. Ilani bedikli, if we have trees and dekel, livarmi ilani. What if all there was gufni v'dikli? All he had was the gufni. All he had was the vines and the dekel. Then levarmi gufni. We assume that an elon is closer to gefen than it is to a dikli. That one's fascinating. That's a very odd one. We wouldn't have assumed on our own that a vineyard is more similar to a tree than a tree called a dekel. We never would have thought that. Let's just wrap up to the top of the page on the 3rd line, and we'll stop right there. Bottom 2 lines of Samach Testament base. Omar Rab. Any tree that can only be climbed with a rope, have a shiur. That's what must have been meant when you said Elon. Elon is defined as a tree that's only climbed with a rope. Kol she'ein olin lo b'cheva lo have a shiur. But if it's not a tree that you climb with a rope, okay, then that's a smaller tree. That's not what you meant by meaning like a small sapling, a tiny little tree. Not what we're talking about. If you're excluding trees, it's big trees, not small trees. The Daine Gola, top of Ayin Amud Aleph. What about the Dayanim of the Gola? Rashi over here says Shmuel V'Karna. Ironically, this exact language was found elsewhere, and it was also the top line of an Amud Aleph. I don't know why. Maybe there is no reason, but it just stuck out that they're both in the same location. So Shmuel and Karna, who were two Amoraim, they said Kol she ha'ol kovsho. If there is, let's say, animals that are walking and the weight of the animals will bend down the tree, so then lo have a shiur. That's not what we're talking about. The tree has to have more strength than that to be the reference of an elan. Kol she'ein ha'ol kovsho. If it doesn't get bent over, then have a shiur. But velo pligi, don't worry. Rav and Shmuel and Karnan are arguing habadikli habailani. They're just talking about different things. Over here with Dayana Gola, they were talking about Ilani, but on the bottom of the page they were talking about Dikli. We'll stop right here at the top of Ayin Amud Aleph, excuse me. Tomorrow I'm recording and posting. I'll be out of town. Wishing you all a beautiful night. Mazel tov to the Brandis family on the wedding.